The rampage at Fort Hood in Texas left 13 people dead and 38 wounded, and now we're learning some troubling new information about the suspected shooter, Nidal Hassan. Did the military ignore previous warning signs, and if so, why?
Let's ask Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. He's a Fox News strategic analyst and author of The War After Armageddon. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
All right, let's talk about this. Did the military here drop the ball? They did, after all, see some extreme internet postings. They did, after all, know that Hassan had told his patients, our troops, that he was against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Did the military drop the ball?
Yes, the military dropped the ball. There's no question about it. This guy was arguing with his patients as a psychiatrist, arguing with his colleagues, gave a class at Walter Reed saying, you know, infidels have to be beheaded. And why did it slip by? Because of the prevailing atmosphere of political correctness in Washington that has sadly infected our senior leadership. Note that this was the greatest terrorist attack, the worst terrorist attack on our country since 9/11. And even the Army leadership won't use the word terrorism, let alone the phrase Islamist terrorism. And then you go beyond the military to the political correctness in the White House. Let me ask you something. You know, first of all, this wasn't important enough for our president to skip happy hour on Friday night at the White House. He didn't go to Fort Hood. Imagine if instead of Fort Hood, this massacre had occurred at a mosque in Detroit. President Obama would have been on Air Force One like a flash, out there at the speed of light, hugging and boohooing and crying.
Now, Ralph,
but we've got 44 military members and their civilian support shot down, and our president can't even go.
But Ralph, hold on a second, because I want to ask you this. Why do you say it's terrorism when other people say maybe he had become mentally ill, maybe he was suffering some sort of PTSD from hearing all of these horror stories, maybe he just desperately didn't want to be deployed? Why is it so clearly cut terrorism in your mind?
Why do I say it's terrorism? Because I'm telling the truth. And it's Islamist terrorism. Look, if a gunman inspired by Islam, as he clearly was, the evidence is there, carefully, buys the weapons, plans it out, cold-bloodedly goes into this center, waits his time out, then gets up, shouts Allah is great, and opens fire. That is an act of terrorism, and if it's done by somebody inspired by the Quran, it's an act of Islamist terrorism. This isn't rocket science.
It is difficult to separate his religion from what happened, but when you look at how this broke down, the FBI knew about these extremist internet postings, but where did the communication break down? How could this have been prevented? Did he not, if he was not promoted, if he was kicked out of the military, how could this have been prevented looking back on it?
Well, if he had not been a member of a protected minority, he would have been out of the Army a long time ago. But political correctness really rules. Now, at Walter Reed, you have a psychiatrist whose education was paid for by the Army, by the way. He wasn't forced into it. He begged for this education. And he's arguing with his patients about the war. And what do? They just kick him downstairs to Fort Hood. I mean, even if this guy had never committed this terrorist act, should we have allowed a nutcase who's arguing anti-war propaganda with our returning veterans? Mm-hmm. Should we be allowing him to treat our returning vets? Don't the vets deserve better? This was a failure from top to bottom in our Army, but it's indicative of this destructive political correctness in Washington, D.C.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, thanks for joining us this morning to talk about this.
Coming up, there's already so many concerns about swine flu, and now